Absolutism. Before Christmas break, we were learning about absolutism, and then we learned about the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution kind of holds hands Jack and Jill style with another movement, the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution are both influenced or affected by absolutism. When's the this again? Tuesday.
What's it on? Packet open now.
The packet over J-term.
Okay, got it.
Okay. So the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment really are kind of next steps in the evolution of individualism, investigation of the Renaissance and Reformation, as well as outcomes of the absolutists, almost countering absolutism in many ways. And so where do we first see this? Well, I remind you, I hearken back to some stuff that you've already learned, which was last semester, near the end of last semester, when we learned about the English Cromwellian era, which had followed a time period of civil war, which Cromwell was involved in, of course, against the royal house of the Stuart line in England. And then the Cromwellian era comes to a close with a restoration period because Cromwell was a dictator. He completely shelves the idea of not only royalty, but also shelves the idea of a republic, which had been promised as an outcome of the Civil War. And so when he is out of the picture, and I remind you that they established when he was out of the picture and they established a restoration government, the king and parliament were supposed to play nice with one another, and the honeymoon may have lasted a little bit with Charles II, and then it started going south. In particular, does anybody remember where the public, or at least Parliament, became very alarmed at Charles II's actions? Do you remember what Charles II attempted to do or agreed to do?
Like the thing with France.
The Treaty of Dover, which was an agreement,
Like Catholic Catholicism back in.
yeah, to usher an era of Catholicism back into England with the support of his first cousin, Louis XIV. When it became public, then Charles II stepped down from power. His little brother James took over, and then of course we know the story, the Glorious Revolution. And I actually will mention some of that in our notes today, but I wanted to kind of remind you before we get started. You might say, Mr. Ernst, I don't understand how that, okay, I see how that has something to do with absolutism, and I see how, that is a political issue, but what does that have to do with the scientific revolution? How is this time period of absolutism connected to the scientific revolution? Well, what we start to find is, no matter what, in the era of absolutism, states either were working with or working away from the authority of the church. Even those states where we thought, oh man, this state, this country, this kingdom works really hand in hand with the church, even those nations begin to kind of assert themselves outside of the church. France, for example, a very Catholic nation, they are the first to embrace the scientific revolution publicly with the establishment of Louis XIV's commission of the Royal Academy of Sciences. So even they start experimenting with the idea of science providing answers that the church isn't. And with that, also, there is liberty that comes with the same movement that is generating the scientific revolution. There is liberty coming with the movement that is creating a revolution of the mind, which is the Enlightenment. So hopefully you can see, and I've always tried to portray this, but hopefully you can see that there is an evolution from Renaissance and Reformation, from Renaissance and Reformation in two steps together, to scientific revolution and Enlightenment, two steps together, as we move forward in time. So it's natural that we would now talk about the Enlightenment. And so where does the Enlightenment begin? Well, it begins in England. The earliest of the Enlightenment movements and also the earliest of political movements begins in England, a nation that was probably more apt to it from 1215 with the signing of Magna Carta onward than any other European nation. Okay, revolution. Let's define what it is, because it is, the Enlightenment is a revolution of the mind, right? But revolution in general, political revolution, is going to follow. So let's define what a revolution is. A revolution is a fundamental and often rapid change in the way a system operates. Yet what causes a fundamental and rapid change? Well, revolutions can often be caused by many different things, one of which could be political, the removal of one set of rulers for another, or the change of the basis of government authority. Maybe it goes from being monarchy to oligarchy, or maybe the basis of government authority is no longer in the hands of a single group, but instead it's a representative form of government. There also can be a revolution when the change in relationship of government to citizen takes place. As in, monarchs rule over subjects. Republics are ruled by citizens. There's a change in the power or the nature of who has authority in the government by way of the relationship of the government to its people. And then when there is a proposal of new missions for the government, sometimes not everybody is excited about that, but those new missions often are revolutionary. We are going to look at, in the next month and a half to 2 months, month and a half-ish, we are going to be looking at several political revolutions. We're going to spend our time a little bit here with the English Revolution, rehashing the Glorious Revolution just briefly. Then we'll talk about the American Revolution just briefly. But then we will dive in a bit deeper into the French Revolution. Those of you who have had me before know the French Revolution well. Those of you who have not, we need to get you caught up. And then from there we can build upon what happens coming out of those revolutions in this month and a half to lead to different kinds of revolution, like the economic and industrial revolutions of the 19th century, the political revolutions that emerge with new social ideologies like Marxism and socialism in general, eventually communism. And then we'll get to where nations, even beyond that, start to kind of recoil, and there are nationalist movements that kind of go against the grain of that. And that leads to, again, an era of more warfare, but we're not there yet. I don't want to get too far down the road. So we're going to start first with looking at what takes place between 1688 and 1799 are these three revolutions. And let's look at what they share. In all three revolutions, the English, the American, and the French revolutions, the government's authority shifts. In all three situations, there is a rejection of divine right. In all three, they seek to create effective bureaucracies in a step forward, if you will, step forward in the way in which they rule. In all three situations, the emerging governments in England, the Americas, and in the French situation, we see endorsement of principle based on individual merit. People want to be recognized for their individuality and their individual successes. We also will see solidification of nation states. England becomes more solidified as state and empire. France will become more solidified. And the United States obviously becomes more solidified because it becomes something out of the revolution. Power is going to extend to upper class professionals. In all three of these revolutions, we are going to see upper class professionals become entrenched in power. The French Revolution is an easy one because most of you probably from remembering last year, who are the upper class professionals that become new power holders in a government post-French Revolution?
The Second Estate.
Well, not the second estate so much as who are the professionals of France. Second estate often were considered nobles. They had title behind their name. They were entitled because of who they were. Who am I talking about?
I wasn't in the Renaissance last year, but I know a little bit about the French Revolution. There were 3 specific people who were leading France at that time.
Well, I'm looking for a particular group of people that were of a class.
First estate.
Nope. Surprised that none of you are saying this. Starts with a B. The bourgeoisie.
Oh, my
Okay. Oh, hey, maybe, good thing we're gonna go over the French Revolution, folks. All right.
You that question. Are we?
So, also in all 3 nations, once they had their revolution, there was an exportation of their political ideas and ideals, which led to then additional wars or revolutions of unknown degrees of mobilization, geographical extent, and human destructiveness. We think of things like revolution, like the American Revolution, or the French Revolution, or the English Revolution as something good. And yes, I mean, for us as Americans, it's good because our nation exists now because of it. But what is the outcome of that? Well, when you look at how time moves forward in all 3 situations, there was more war that came after those revolutions than there was before. There was more destructiveness that came after those revolutions than there was before them. So as we move forward, we're going to see things become much, much more extensive in mobilization, geographical influence, and extent, and human destructiveness. And in order to understand these, we have to understand what inspired them, which is the Enlightenment. All right. For much of this lecture, we're going to be talking about old, dead, white dudes. Okay? Sorry, but that's just kind of what it is. This is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, okay, lived from 1588 to 1679. He is not living completely during the time period of English, not completely during the time period of English monarchy as absolutist monarchy, but not completely as English parliamentarian democracy or a constitutional monarchy either. You see, Hobbes lives in a time of the Stuarts. Hobbes lives in a time of the emerging Cromwellian era. Cromwell's era actually inspires him to write something called Leviathan. Leviathan. What is a Leviathan?
It's a creature from the depths of the waters. It's like a big snake-like creature, and it's
A sea monster.
sea monster.
Yeah. A biblical sea monster, okay? A multi-tentacled beast. Now, in the political book Leviathan, and there is a reason he names it that, and I will tell you in a minute. In the political book Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes explores where does governance come from? And essentially, to boil down and paraphrase in my own words, where is it that Thomas Hobbes is going in the book Leviathan? He basically takes you on a journey into time, back in time. And he tells you, the reader, that, well, he poses the question, why does government exist? Or how does government exist? Right? And in that, he says that at some point in man's past, man lived in a lawless time of a state of nature. Okay? In this state of nature, man was subject to other man only by their own defenses or abilities to protect themselves or defend themselves. So, for example, if I wanted this iPad in the ancient past, not that iPads existed in the ancient past, but if I wanted this iPad, hello Ben Parr, but if I wanted this, right, there's nothing stopping me from taking it, right? There's nothing stopping me from taking this iPad away from Max because, to be quite honest, I'm probably stronger, bigger, and Max, let's just face it, if I sat on you, you wouldn't get up, right? So, like, I'm taking this iPad, and there's nothing that you can do about it. That's a state of nature, right? But because man in a state of nature could do whatever the heck he wanted, at some point, man, collectively, we, man, in our past, gave up our state of nature, or at least gave up a little bit of freedom in order to protect ourselves from others. So, if we view this as like in the ancient past, we were all together in I don't know, some kind of little village or whatever, and Mr. Ernst is taking things away from everybody else, you all are going to say, you know what, I'm willing to trade away a little bit of my personal freedom to follow the leader. And we all say, who? Who can stand up for us? Who can defend us from big bad Ernst and taking all of our stuff? Right? And so each of you give up a little bit of your personal freedom in exchange for a leader who protects you. And of course, we all select Noah. Right? Right? And so Noah now is the authority. He is sovereign. That's what it means. He has sovereignty or authority above everyone else to do what it takes to protect them, to know what's best to take care of them. He has engaged with you in what now Hobbes defines as the social contract. In Leviathan, he talks about how a state of nature is given up in exchange for protection. So social contract, up here on the notes. The king, this is from Leviathan, and I paraphrased it a little bit, but the king has not the right to rule because of some mythical divine gift, right? Not God tapping Noah and saying, you are divine, you are the hand of God on earth. No, at some point in the ancient past, it was whom? It was... No.
It was the person who could protect them.
Well, it was the people who gave Noah that power. That's who created the sovereignty for Noah to be the one who's the authority. The king has not the right to rule because of some mythical gift, but instead, long ago, he or his family was entrusted with authority to the extent that they would represent the will of the people. The people longed for safety and security from people like Ernst, who would come around and steal iPads. Right? Otherwise, how would they have been allowed to remain in power? You wouldn't have allowed Noah to stay in power if Noah wasn't protecting anybody. You would have immediately done what? The first time he failed, you would have done what? Got rid of him and got somebody else. Right? Without guidance and law, there would be constant jeopardy of life. Men gave up some of their liberty in exchange for social and political order. Now, this is Hobbes. And if we could bring Hobbes back from time, bring him to the modern society of 2025. God, it's so weird saying that. The 2025, here we are in Cathedral in room 4106, and boom, there's Thomas Hobbes in the corner, and now we're going to interview him. We'd ask him this question, which, again, old white dude, so I probably just played the part. Right? Here I am, old white dude. Right? Thomas Hobbes would say, if you asked him, what do you think of man? And Thomas Hobbes would have said, man is evil and brutish. Right? Sinful and greedy. That's what Thomas Hobbes would have said. Why would Thomas Hobbes feel that way? Think about the time period that Hobbes was raised in.
It was raised in Cromwellian period.
Not in Cromwellian period, in the time before Cromwell. In a time period where he saw the Stuart line come into England. They were not liked, they were not wanted. He saw the Stuart line and the kings as abusive. He saw them as flexing their authority too much. And he also saw a great deal of, over the course of recent history, war and violence. And so no wonder would Thomas Hobbes feel as if man had to protect himself from man, because man is greedy, brutish, sinful, just nasty. Okay. Let's consider time of Hobbes. 17th century England was one of turmoil and confrontation. England was caught in debate and conflict. No man could seem to settle the differences. Think about it. Hobbes' generation lived in a time period of the Stuart line. Hobbes' grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents had lived through the Tudor dynasties and the War of the Roses. So there was not really a great deal of, happiness in England at this time. You had Protestants, you had Catholics, you had those who wanted this line of kings, and you had those who didn't want them. You all right? You need to get a drink?
I ran out.
Go get it filled. Okay. So, in some cases, English kings wanted to raise taxes. Parliament refused and proposed restructuring of power, more power for the elected legislature, promotion by merit in the government, religious tolerance, and private and public life. But these requests were ignored, and then eventually we have a civil war. Thomas Hobbes lives during that civil war. Hobbes did not like the disorder which was prevalent, and he felt that government needed to be strong, that there needed to be a strong ruler who could keep all facets of society in check. Hobbes likely would have been excited by whom's rise to power? Cromwell. Because, basically, Cromwell represents to Hobbes a Leviathan, a multi-tentacled beast that sometimes has to be what? Turned out from the god or gods, turned onto the what? The various people to keep them in check. That the government needs to be able to keep people in check. Keep the brutish, sinful greediness down. Man is inherently evil. Cromwell was a leader of parliament, yes, a Puritan, a military genius, and he led the military forces against the royal family. We know the story. We know that he wins. We know that he rules as a dictator, but the people wanted more than to be subdued by a dictator. So after the Cromwell era is over, I'm coming, Noah, I'm coming. After the Cromwell era is over, we have the Restoration and the Glorious Revolution. Now, that brings us to our second English philosopher who is shaped by these times in the Enlightenment. And we'll get to him in just a second. Right? I'm just reminding you, you got this information already from when we learned about it last semester. I'm just reminding you of it. When Cromwell died in 1658, the crown had to be restored. Supporters of the royals were able to place the royals back on the throne. Give Charles II, his little brother James, we know the story. Charles II engaged in the Treaty of Dover and he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. You know what I mean by that. James was raised a Catholic, so when Charles steps down, James becomes king, and Parliament's like, oh snap, this guy's Catholic, and his wife's got a bun in the oven, Catholic heir. So what does Parliament do? They go out and get James's Protestant adult daughter and her husband, William and Mary, to come back and then launch the Glorious Revolution. There is one major battle of the Glorious Revolution. It doesn't get fought in England, but instead at the Battle of Boyne in Ireland. And James's forces are defeated by William's forces, and there they are, William and Mary. Now, we know that the parliamentarian constitutional monarchy is created with the Bill of Rights in 1689. Enacted as part of this agreement was a contract that guaranteed certain rights for the people in England as citizens. England itself was now a constitutional monarchy, and the king and queen agreed to be figureheads. But then the smart folks here in the room already know, hey, what's in it for William and Mary? A portion of the English Bill of Rights in 1689, yes, said that no taxes could be raised, no armies recruited without parliament approval, that there would be no subject that could be arrested without due process of law, and that the law could not be suspended by the king. But secretly, there was another agreement that William and Mary insisted upon, or I should say that they agreed to, and that was the fact that they got to retain sovereignty where? All the colonies, the Commonwealth. right? The Commonwealth of England is now theirs, that they act as sovereign of. Then within the country of England, the Kingdom of England, who is sovereign? Parliament, with it being elected by the people, right? Okay. So what are the results of the Glorious Revolution? One monarch displaced in the favor of another. A limitation of power of the monarch under constitutional law, and the Anglican Church could remain the official church of the state. However, that secret deal, right? That secret deal provided sovereignty that continued. Now, that secret deal affects us. And we are heavily influenced by another English philosopher, John Locke. Locke lives during the time period of the Cromwellian era and into the post-Cromwellian era, the Glorious Revolution. Locke was younger than Thomas Hobbes. Locke was a scholar who wrote a political essay called The Second Treatise on Government. Okay? A treatise is an agreement, right? So this is his second agreement on government. It is a parallel of the English Revolution, and it predicted many other revolutions to come. Okay? Locke agreed with Hobbes. He said, yes, I agree with Hobbes that government is a contract between the people, right? But Locke felt that the legitimacy of the contract continued only as long as consent continued. Locke said, man's not born inherently evil. Locke said, man actually is born a good person. Like, good people can go bad, but man is not made bad from the outset, right? Locke felt instead that the problem with Thomas Hobbes' approach, perhaps, was the fact that it was built upon principles that you had to have a government that was a strong hand against the people. But instead, Locke basically said, government should exist for one purpose and one purpose only: to protect property. Okay? Government should exist for the protection of property. As long as property is being protected, the only voice that there should be in government is property owners' voices. So, that legitimized the Glorious Revolution, because who wins the Glorious Revolution? What organization wins the Glorious Revolution, throwing out the system of government, creating a constitutional monarchy for which they are now in control of? Parliament, right? So Locke says there still remains in the people a supreme power to remove or alter the legislative. And that's what the Glorious Revolution did. So Locke would have been in agreement with the Glorious Revolution. Locke believed in majority rule. No majority agreement on a given system, thus there is no contract, and it should be shredded. The government, the idea of a contract should be thrown out and a new contract created if there is not sovereignty of the people. Locke was not a believer in pure democracy, though. Locke did not believe that every stinking person should have a say. Instead, Locke felt that government existed only for property owners, because government is about protection. Protection of what? Property. Not everybody has property, so not everybody has a say. Locke's system legitimized the rule of king's power being given to a class of landowners and put in the power of constitutional rule. This inspired the Americans. But it took a while. Okay? When was Second Treatise published? It was published just after, I think I actually even have the date. Don't I have the Second Treatise? No, I don't. It was published right after the Glorious Revolution, so roughly around 1700. Okay? It'll be 75 years-ish before Locke's action is inspiring the Americans. You see, Americans declared, their independence, we know, in 1776, but that Declaration of Independence came after frustration of almost 100 years of settlers here expecting that they were what back home? Citizens, and then realization that they weren't. When was the first big realization? What happened here in the Americas, and we've mentioned this event coming, we haven't talked about it. Well, yes, the French and Indian War in the Americas, that American colonists were instructed, told, subjugated by their king, who was a ocean away, that they were supposed to fight this fight on behalf of the monarchy against the French here in the New World. And then they do. And they win. And upon winning, they're forced to pay for it with taxes and indemnities that were placed upon them, right? And tariffs that were placed upon them to pay back the debts of the war. And the American colonist is looking at this and saying, I never agreed to this. I'm a citizen. Where's my representation, which I'm promised? And of course, we know no representation without, or no taxation without representation, right? All that. So the Americans then banished the monarchy completely, replacing it with an elected government, sought to consolidate their commitments into new legal structures to provide life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sounds kind of vague. Where do they come up with their ideas? They came up with it from Second Treaties. In Second Treaties, there is a line that basically says government exists for the protection of life, liberty, and property. Those are the only reasons that government should exist. Life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson, young Thomas J., when he was a young man, maybe your age, was reading Second Treaties, and those words stuck with him. And then flash forward to 1776, when he's writing what? One night, lit by candle, the Declaration. And he puts into it, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Why so vague in the use of happiness? Why not property? Who knows the answer? Because slaves were property and he didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Because he had slaves himself, and because most of the individuals who he was standing with against the English government also had slaves. Yes. Okay. But that idea of property, right, also by softening it to happiness, even outside of the issue of slavery, also allowed for many, many more people to participate and feel they had a stake of ownership in the revolution. So like, for example, a shopkeeper, not the shop owner, or a blacksmith's apprentice, not the blacksmith himself. So there are two reasons for why it was softened. Ultimately, we know what happens. We know that it is the Americans that overthrow the English. Okay. Take a deep breath for a second. We've covered a lot. I know much of that you already knew, but you didn't have it all pieced together. Okay? Take a deep breath for a second. The next step for us in talking about the Enlightenment is the Enlightenment isn't just one that's political. There's also an economic enlightenment. We need to connect some pieces together of stuff we talked about last semester. Mercantilism and capitalism. But we need to go into it with a little bit more depth. We need to know what we're talking about. So if you have a question on the AP exam in May that involves comparing or contrasting mercantilism to capitalism, or explaining the economic philosophies of the Enlightenment, you'll be able to address that. It just so happens that 4 years ago, one of the short answer questions was asking students to compare the outcomes politically and economically of the Enlightenment, which this is basically what we're doing today. Okay? All right. So, an economic enlightenment takes place, not just a political enlightenment. And again, who are we going to look to display this? We're going to look at two kingdoms, the English and the French. During the 16th and 17th centuries, both France and England had engaged in colonization. We know that. We know that they engaged in trade in the Americas. Both claimed large territories in North America. Where were the English? The eastern seaboard, right? The 13 colonies, right? The eastern seaboard. Where else were the English? Well, in the Americas, where else were they? The Caribbean. Okay. What about the French? Where were the French?
Canada.
In, what'd you say?
Canada.
In the Canada. In New France, yes, portions of Canada, but also you're sitting in it right now. This also was New France, right? So the interior of the Americas both began to reorganize their economies for this newfound natural resource wealth. France based its economy strength in something called mercantilism, and England, while it had begun to dabble in mercantilism, quickly abandoned it during the era after Cromwell, because mercantilism and Cromwell went hand in hand. What did we learn about in our stuff from last semester that Cromwell was very much responsible for? The Navigation Acts of 1651, okay? The Navigation Acts of 1651 were passed through the Cromwellian-controlled Parliament. Those Navigation Acts were the stipulation that all English shipments in and out of the country could not be brought in or taken out of the country by anything but English ships. Okay? That is a mercantile, that's a mercantile rule. Okay? What is mercantilism all about? What's a key word if you're talking about what mercantilism is? The idea that there's a finite amount of gold and silver in the world, and you as a nation competing with other nations have to gobble up as much of it as possible. What are you going to do in order to ensure that you get as much of that gold and silver? You're going to put on restrictions, and you're going to put into place regulations and controls. So a key word of mercantilism is to effectively control every aspect of your economy. So the Cromwellian era Navigation Act of 1651 was very much a control on what is brought in and brought out of your country, and who brings it in and who brings it out. That way you can control that your gold and silver is not what? Not what?
Finite.
Well, it's not, it is finite.
Stolen.
So your gold and silver is not leaving your country. Right. So the key word to the French system of mercantilism is control. But eventually England realizes they don't like that. What opens their eyes to the potential? What subject or what economic issue? What raw resource, if you will? It wasn't raw, it was the same resource.
Tobacco?
No, that's a good guess though.
Sugarcane.
No, sugarcane though. Sugarcane, here, let's go down this road. You're right in that it's sugarcane, but it's more than just sugarcane.
Oh, cash crops.
Well, cash crops like sugarcane,
Tobacco.
yes.
Sugar.
Tobacco?
What'd you say?
Sugar?
No.
Tobacco?
Sugar, yeah, that's sugarcane, guys.
Yeah, but it's different.
Tobacco is also a
It's
cash
sugar.
crop.
It's
I'm
sugar.
asking you to think about this. What does England control that allows them to make
Wood.
enormous amounts of money on those cash crops,
Right.
but also on the labor that controls or creates those cash crops? Slavery.
Oh, it actually is.
Slavery kicks open the door of capitalism. Slavery and cash crops. So when England starts to realize there's a great deal of money to be made by lessening control, there's a great deal of individual investment that can be made. What do we see start popping up? What business ventures pop up both in England and in the Dutch colonies? Or not Dutch colonies, but the Dutch Netherlands. Say that louder. Joint stock companies, you whispered it to. Joint stock companies. So mercantilism, yes, mercantilism, we know what it is. It's all about control. It's limiting your imports, pushing your exports. Here's a famous painting depicting a French Riviera, okay, a French Riviera port. And what do you see in this painting that maybe depicts mercantilism? Ships, okay. Ships.
People
all,
watching.
What?
People watching the ships.
People watching the ships? Well, okay, maybe how's that depicting mercantilism?
Cause like control, like see what goes in.
Okay,
and out.
I like where you're going there. All right, I'll give you credit for that one. All right. What else do you notice? All the ships are flying the same what? Banner. There is no other banner in that port. Right? So mercantilism's all about control. Who was a big proponent of mercantilism? We read a little bit about him last semester.
He was-
Colbert. He was the advisor to whom?
he
It
was-
says it right there. Louis XIV. Okay? He is a French philosopher of the Enlightenment. He is not just a he's not just Louis XIV's financial advisor, he was also, before that, he was a French philosopher. He was an economist. Together, he and with the authority given to him by Louis XIV, they regulate the economy with several changes. They created trade codes, commercial trade codes. They strengthened the infrastructure of France. They set quality standards for manufacturing. They gave financial incentives to certain producers. All of those things are what? Examples of their control. Okay? The French have always attempted to assert their position of control in Europe as well. During this time, the French approach on mainland continental Europe was this: if you want to tangle, we'll tangle. We have the largest army on the continent. We'll throw our weight around, just like I kind of did here with Max a little earlier. You know, we'll sit on you. You won't get up, right? That was the French military. The French military was the most advanced fighting force of its time, basically because they had the largest number of troops and they had the largest population. They engaged in a few wars during this time, but it didn't necessarily pay off very well. Even though French armies had the largest armies, they weren't necessarily playing the same game as others, like the English. Or, let me point this out to you. There's a War of Spanish Succession in which the French lost several Canadian holdings. It's not good. Now they don't have as much what? Land or resource. Then you've got the War of Austrian Succession, which the French lost the St. Lawrence Seaway. Now they can't get to the land that they want or that they have. They have to travel upriver now from New Orleans. Then, in the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, with the help of American colonials, the British defeat the French and claim control of Appalachia's western edge and beyond. The British begin to emerge as the leading sea power of Europe, and France loses. What is England doing then? England and its economic growth, an island nation that saw the importance of oceanic trade, they had to because they had limited resources and space. England concentrated itself building a navy in order to protect the trade that they were involved in. They fixed the value of their currency to silver, and they maintained that value for several centuries. Literally, the English pound is based on the fact of it being a pound of what? Weight. Pound of silver. Right. Okay. They become the business leaders for international trade because of the security and value of their currency and their trade. From this time period, we have the emergence of a idea, a way of lessening the controls of mercantilism. It becomes known as capitalism. But I don't want you to mistake it as a system created by somebody. It was a natural evolution from mercantilism's lessening of control to then capitalism's emergence. Somebody puts it into words and is often misquoted as being the father of capitalism. Okay? Smith, seen as the father of capitalism, isn't necessarily a true statement. This is Adam Smith. How many of you have heard of Adam Smith before? The famous work of Adam Smith is Wealth of Nations, right? And it's a book that explains and explores how business shifted over the course of 75 to 100 years during the 18th century, from the 17th into the 18th century. But Adam Smith did not create it. He was just simply documenting what was happening naturally. As control lessened, as controls were taken off, or regulation was taken off of English economics, what starts to emerge is a very ultra-competitive market where it's not nations competing for a finite amount of gold and silver. Now wealth is not finite, it's people competing for what? An endless amount of money that is determined by the value of strength of the nation's economy. Okay? Some of you want to go into finance. I know that's a big popular major in college and all that, in economics. If you don't understand this stuff, if you don't understand mercantilism and capitalism, if you don't know this stuff, you're not going to be able to go much further, right? You gotta get this down. Where does it come from, right? That's what I'm teaching you. We're almost ready to go to lunch, just chill out. I'm gonna finish this slide and then we're gonna go. Don't start packing your stuff away. Just wait. So, as I said, Smith documents what's happening with an emerging lessening of control. The production of a nation's basically strength of economy is measured by its productivity of trade given in the international market, not on how much gold or silver it has within its own balance. With specialization of labor comes productivity. With productivity comes better product. Capitalism. I'm going to leave you with this, and I want you to remember it because this is where we will pick up when we talk about this in our next class after you take the open note quest. So make a note of this off to the side. Capitalism. Listen to me. Capitalism creates, all right? Capitalism creates new products that leads to more competition, which drives the entire economy forward. I have to be able to explain that to you. So that's where we leave off. Capitalism creates new products that then creates new competition, which drives the economy forward. So I need to be able to explain that to you when we come back. Make sure that you do yourself a favor and you look over your J-term packet before you come to class on Tuesday. If you come to come to class without looking at it, you're going to be hunting and pecking trying to find the answers, and you're not going to have enough time to answer everything on the test. You need to at least look over stuff.
How long is the test?
Haven't decided how long the test is yet. I'm not going to put a number on it. But what I'm saying is you'll be scrambling trying to find answers. Yes, there is writing on it. See you guys.
Thank you.